Welcome to another FOA in 15. Today, we're going to be talking about managing COVID-19 liability during business reopening. I'm Justin FOA, CEO and President of FOA & Son, and I'm joined by Bernard Goldman, our General Counsel here. And we're going to be jumping in because people are starting to reopen their businesses, and we're getting tons of questions about what kind of liability they're opening themselves up to, both customers, vendors, and their own employees. So Bernie, let's jump right in. First, in principle, can a business be sued for a claim that somebody contracted COVID-19 on their premises?
Yes. I mean, personal injury lawyers would like to say you could be sued for almost anything. Businesses can be sued if somebody after the fact could make an argument that you didn't exercise the level of care that similar businesses, should, a reasonable business should. So if there are procedures that other businesses in your industry are following and you're not following them, it opens you up to a lawsuit. If there are industry standards, for, like there's a trade group and they're recommending certain steps and you choose to ignore those, that could open you up. So that's where the potential for liability lawsuits come in.
Gotcha. In terms of vendors coming onto your premises, are there things you can do to mitigate or that liability or risk?
Yeah, definitely. So we're seeing more and more, particularly with vendors, different types of disclosures and assumption of risk documents for COVID-19. Many of the property managers, the major property managers, are insisting that any vendor, any contractor that enters a building first have to execute a document. And the key elements of the document are, one, an explanation in terms of, the hazards of COVID-19. Two, that those can't all be contained. Three, whatever safety standards you have for your building, making them aware, you have to follow these. So for argument's sake, if in the public areas you require everybody to wear a mask, and that seems to be the biggest one, you would put that right in the document. And the last one, particularly for contractors and major vendors, is a hold harmless, something where they say, look, if you will not bring anybody onto our premises that either has been confirmed as testing positive or that is suspected of testing positive. And if you do, and somebody gets sick, you agree to hold us harmless. So it's not a slam dunk that they're going to be fully enforceable. It definitely will help.
Gotcha. What about getting customers to sign these types of waivers?
The logic to it and the legalities apply to customers the same like it would for vendors. It's obviously a little more difficult in certain types of businesses to get a customer to sign some type of a waiver or hold harmless. But certainly things like doctor's offices where you're filling out paperwork, a document like that could be included with the ordinary paperwork. When gyms start to reopen, something that alerts the customers. So it's not just those assumption of risk, it's also to make sure they understand as a customer, these are policies. This is how we're keeping you safe, and this is how we're keeping the other customers safe. And you want to memorialize that and make it abundantly clear that, that they've been apprised of it.
Great. Now let's shift on to employees. Companies are bringing their employees back into the workplace. Most of them are creating certain procedures that might mitigate COVID transmission, but if an employee gets COVID, obviously there's a potential for a lawsuit against the employer. Can you talk about those?
Yeah, so workers' compensation technically could apply to a case of somebody getting COVID-19 either on the work site or in connection with their work duties. We haven't seen a ton of cases yet where employees have been successful with workers' compensation. Part of the reason for that is that one is just a practical proof issue. How do you establish that you contracted COVID-19 at work when you may have been around 10 other people or 100 other people? Second issue is there needs to be something about the work that increased the risk that you would catch COVID-19. If you work in a hospital, it's pretty straightforward. Look, I'm around people who have it, I have a heightened risk. So that's one area where potentially you can have those claims. But for other businesses, it's very difficult to make out the case. The good news for businesses is, the statutory workers' compensation. It does mean that even if employees have these types of claims, they're not allowed to sue you. In most states across the country, with a couple exceptions like Texas, if an employee has some type of workplace injury or disease, they have to go through the workers' compensation process. They're not allowed to sue their employers. The benefits are predefined in workers' compensation. The process is a little bit more streamlined. And fortunately, for businesses in some states like New York, the benefits really are unlimited. So regardless of what the amount is, that doesn't come back to touch the client themselves.
Great. Let's talk a little bit about these lawsuits. What kind of lawsuits have been filed to date? How common are these lawsuits? And what are the main challenges the plaintiffs have been faced in the cases in order to try and hold these companies liable?
So initially there were number of lawsuits in hospitality and also things like the cruise lines. A little bit easier in that context to make out a case because, so take the situation with those cruise ships that were stranded initially and people couldn't offload. 20-25% of the population on the ship may be COVID-19 positive, and you're trapped. There is no place to go. So, there's not as much arguments. But even in those cases, they really have somewhat bogged down. So remember, there's no absolute liability for a business owner for somebody getting COVID-19. You can't just sue saying, I got it, so you're responsible, you have to pay. You have to show negligence. Negligence means there's something that, again, a reasonable business owner, a reasonable business in that situation should have done different. So even in the cruise ships, there's no port that will allow you to dock and to offload your customers. What do? It's not a slam dunk that you can make out a case of negligence. So there haven't been a ton of cases filed. There have been some liability lawsuits, but they have not had tremendous initial traction. It's not like people just go to court and they're getting huge recoveries on these things.
Gotcha. So let's say that a lawsuit does come in. How is insurance playing a part in defending clients?
That's been evolving. General liability insurance would respond to a variety of claims of negligence. And conceptually, a claim that somebody caught COVID-19 because a business owner was negligent is no different. The issue is that certain insurance policies in certain industries historically have had what they call contagion exclusions. So there have been contagion exclusions on, or at least available in the insurance marketplace for a number of years. They started from MERS and SARS and, from those health crises. Again, in some industries, it's been more common than others to have those exclusions. What we're seeing is that more and more insurance companies that didn't have them filed, that they've started to do it. So generally speaking, if you don't have that type of exclusion, you would get coverage. But it's important to make sure that you do have a policy that doesn't have those exclusions. And long term, most policies will. I think when we're 12 months out from today, 95% of the policies will have it. It seems like the only insurance companies that aren't using it, it's just a filing issue with the states that they've never gone through the process.
Gotcha. What about legislative issues that are going on? Has there been anything that's been passed, and is there anything that might be coming down the pipe?
So one of the initial suggestions at both the state and federal level was some type of liability immunity. Businesses were hesitant to reopen and then face lawsuits that may or may not be covered because they have contagion exclusions. So nothing across the board has yet to pass in terms of immunity. There's been isolated immunity. By that I mean, under the CARES Act, if you were selling personal protection equipment, things that wasn't like masks that isn't NIOSH certified, but they deem it to be an adequate substitute, there's immunity for those things in case somebody were to come back and say, well, this doesn't meet the criteria of, that previously was established. It's being talked about, and there is still a decent chance that something might pass on the federal level, but politically, it just seems to be bogged down with a lot of the relief packages.
Great. So let's just quickly summarize. You're a business owner, you're reopening. What are the things that you need to think about and put in place in order to minimize your exposure to these liability claims for someone contracting COVID, whether it's your employees, your vendors, or your customers?
First is a safety process. It needs to be in writing. If there are industry standards that are applicable to you, a trade group, car dealer, for example, there are national associations that have recommendations. That's a great starting point. There's some good resources on the Fo and Son COVID-19 resource page that can give you a good starting point. But the key elements are what you already know. Their mask, facial protection, their cleaning and disinfecting processes, and their social distancing. So it's typically some combination of that. And then the last element is screening. So for example, some commercial buildings are having temperature checks as people come in. There's different ways you could do that. Touchless. I mean, there's infrared guns where you could just point it at somebody and it'll tell you if they have elevated temperatures. There's more elegant solutions. But those are the ingredients. So step one would be map out what is a reasonable, safe way that you can reopen given the risks. Step two, how do you let your customers, your vendors, your clients know that these are processes? If you don't communicate it, it's pointless. So they need to be posted, they need to be shared. If you're the type of business that has external vendors coming on site, those need to be provided to them in advance. Step three gets into the issue of waivers and those types of documents that we talked about. So look at it in two categories. One, the vendors, contractors, the folks that you're dealing with can then memorialize those procedures. This is what you have to do, and also the hold harmless. Second would be customers. Is that really practical for your type of business, or is it impractical? You're not going to be able to get customers to sign a document like that. And then the last step is simply enforcement. So everybody's heard the story at this point, likely about Costco, how pretty much every employee there, if they see somebody coming into the premises without a mask, you just speak up, say something, say, look, we're not going to allow you on the premises. If you have a set of procedures and you're not following them, you're not enforcing them, those are the types of things that personal injury lawyers will jump on. And those are the things that personal injury lawyers will see. So if you're in a volume business, you're a retailer, you're going to have attorneys that are your customers. If they see you have procedures posted that say every customer must wear a mask or they're not allowed on site, and 3/4 of your customers don't, you're going to get sued because you just make it easy. They're going to take their phone, snap a picture, snap photos of everybody, and that's the process that you need to really be cognizant of. Make sure you have it laid out and make sure you're enforcing it.
Great. Bernie, thanks so much for that roundup. If you have any more questions about specific coverage issues in your insurance portfolio, please talk to your Foe and Son account representative. And also, if you have any other questions, please feel free to contact either me or Bernie, and we'll be happy to assist. This has been another FOA in 15. Look out for our next recording shortly.
Thank you, Justin.